Pilot screamed for help. Mid-flight. A 31-year-old co-pilot. Alone. 168 lives hanging. Then seat 5C moved. An old farmer woman. Rough hands. Quiet face. She grabbed the mic and said 4 words. The co-pilot obeyed instantly. Because her voice left no choice. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Look at her hands. That is the first thing you notice, if you notice her at all. Dorothy Calloway is sitting in seat 5C, window side, and her hands are resting on her knees the way hands rest when they have rested in that same position 10,000 times before. They are the hands of a 71-year-old woman who has spent the last 19 years working soil. The knuckles are large. The skin is thin in places, spotted in others, rough along the palms in a specific way that comes from real work, not gym work, not weekend gardening, but the kind of work where you are outside before the sun and still outside when it sets and the land does not care how tired you are. The man in seat 5B, his name is Gerald, he is 58, he sells commercial insurance in St. Louis, glances at those hands when she settles in beside him. He thinks, farmer. Maybe retired. Probably has grandchildren somewhere. He is not wrong about the farmer part. Dot is looking out the window as the plane taxis toward the runway. Her expression is calm. But it is not the calm of distraction, not the scrolling phone calm or the headphone calm or the pretending to sleep calm of the other passengers. Hers is a different kind. It is the calm of attention. Her eyes are moving. She is reading the taxiway signs. She is watching the runway markings slide past the window. She is counting. She is measuring. Old habit. She cannot stop. She stopped trying to stop a long time ago. The flight attendant leans in slightly when she asks Dot if she would like anything before takeoff. She speaks a little louder than necessary. Dot says no thank you and smiles, and the flight attendant moves on, and nobody looks at the woman in 5C twice. Narrator, quietly, no music yet, just a voice. Her name was Dorothy Calloway. She was 71 years old. She had a wheat farm in Kansas, a carry-on bag with a small wheat sticker on it, and hands that had spent the last 19 years in soil. Nobody on that plane knew what those hands had done before the soil. Nobody thought to ask. This is a story about what happens when the world needs something from a person it never thought to look at. She eats a small bag of pretzels somewhere over eastern Missouri. She does not eat them quickly or mindlessly, she eats them the way she does most things, with a quiet and deliberate attention, as if each one deserves to be noticed. She has a paperback novel open on her tray table. Something unremarkable. A mystery set in coastal Maine. She bought it at the airport bookstore because the cover looked peaceful and she has been craving peaceful things lately. When turbulence hits over the Missouri River, nothing serious, just the ordinary bump and shudder of a plane meeting weather, the man beside her grips the armrest. His knuckles go white. Dot does not grip anything. She does not tense. She reads her sentence, finishes it, turns the page. Gerald notices this. He finds it mildly impressive. He assumes she is just one of those people who is not afraid of flying. He is correct, in the way that saying the ocean is not afraid of the rain is correct. 2 rows back, a child, maybe 3 years old, maybe 4, begins to cry. Not the shrieking cry of fear but the long, exhausted cry of a small person who has been sitting still too long and cannot explain why everything feels wrong. The mother is making the hushed, desperate sounds of a parent trying not to make things worse. Dot turns in her seat. She catches the mother's eye. She smiles. Not the big performed smile of a stranger trying to help, not the look of someone signaling patience they do not feel. It is a specific smile. The smile of someone who has sat with fear before and knows, from experience in her bones, that it passes. The mother relaxes slightly. She does not know why. The child quiets within a minute. These things happen. Now, before we go any further, you need to know who Dorothy Calloway is. Not who she was. Who she is. Because this is the mistake people make with time, they think the past and the present are separate countries, that what a person used to be has nothing to do with what they are now. That is not how people work. That is not how that works. She was born in 1953 in Pratt, Kansas. She grew up watching planes cross the sky from her father's porch and feeling something she could not name, a pull, or recognition, as if the sky already knew her and was simply waiting. She joined the Air Force at 19. She learned to fly in conditions that washed out pilots twice her size. In her second year of service, she flew through cloud cover so dense that her aircraft disappeared completely from visual range and reappeared on the other side precisely on heading, on altitude, on schedule, as if the weather had not existed at all. A senior officer watched it happen and said, simply, "She flies like a ghost. You don't see her coming and then she's exactly where she's supposed to be." The call sign stuck. Ghost. She loved it and said nothing about loving it. She was not the kind of person who said things like that out loud. But in the private hours, the nights before difficult missions, the mornings after hard landings, the long stretches of ordinary flying when it was just her and the aircraft and the sky, she turned the word over in her mind. Ghost. She flies like a ghost. You don't see her coming and then she's exactly where she's supposed to be. She had spent her whole life being underestimated, overlooked, spoken to slightly too loudly as if she might not understand. And then she flew, and she was a ghost, invisible on the way in, undeniable on the way out. She had decided, at some point in her 20s, that this was the best possible description of how she intended to move through the world. She flew 34 combat support missions in Vietnam-era theater over the course of her service. She was pulled from 3 more, not because of anything she did wrong, not because of skill or fitness or readiness, but because command did not want a woman in certain airspace at certain times for reasons that had nothing to do with aviation. Political reasons. Reasons she was never given the full text of, only the outcome. Stand down, Captain. You're not on this one. She stood down each time. She did not argue. She went back to her quarters and she sat very still for a while and then she got up and did her job. She flew for 40 years in and around military aviation. She retired at 52 as a captain, a rank that should have been higher, that would have been higher if the metrics used to measure her had been the same metrics used to measure the men she flew alongside. She had 14,000 flight hours. She had a drawer full of commendations, citations, and formal recognitions she has never shown to another living person. She moved back to Kansas after retirement. She bought a wheat farm outside of Pratt. Her neighbors think she used to be a schoolteacher. She has never corrected them. Every morning, every single morning for 19 years, she stands on her porch before sunrise and looks at the sky for exactly 5 minutes. She watches the dark shift. She watches the first gray come in at the edges. She watches the stars go out one by one. She tells herself it is just habit. It is not just habit. She thinks of her career the way some people think of a book with the last chapter torn out. Everything building towards something that never arrived. She had been good. She knew she had been good. But good had not been enough to open the doors that were closed to her, and she had spent 19 years in a wheat field trying to decide whether that was the Air Force's failure or hers. She had never reached a verdict. She suspected she never would. She is not bitter. Bitterness requires a kind of active energy she redirected decades ago. She is simply a woman who believes, quietly and completely, that the sum of what she was allowed to do never matched the sum of what she could have done. That ghost, the call sign, the pilot, the woman who flew through weather that grounded everyone else, was not quite enough. There was a morning, maybe 6 years after she retired, maybe 7, the years blur in Kansas the way years do when the work is steady and the sky is the same sky every day, when she drove into Pratt to buy seed and ran into a man she had served with. Colonel James Whitfield, who had been a captain when she knew him, who had flown half the hours she had and risen twice as high. He did not recognize her at first. When he did, his face did something complicated, guilt and warmth and the particular discomfort of a man who knows, somewhere underneath everything, that the math was not fair. He said she looked wonderful. She said he did too. They talked for 4 minutes in the parking lot of a hardware store and then went their separate ways, and she drove home and stood on her porch even though it was 2 in the afternoon and not her usual time, and looked at the sky for longer than 5 minutes and did not name what she was feeling because she had gotten very good at not naming it. She carries it the way people carry things they have never said out loud. Not as drama. As weather. Just always there. Just always gray. She is wrong. Today she will find out she is wrong. 40 minutes into the flight, Captain Ray Harris makes a sound. It is not a dramatic sound. It is barely a sound at all. A short exhale, almost nothing, the kind of sound a man makes when he sits down too fast or sets something heavy on a counter. But it is wrong. It is wrong in the way a single wrong note in a familiar song is wrong. You might not be able to name it immediately, but something in you knows. First Officer Danny Cho hears it. He is 31 years old. He has 800 total flight hours. He is competent and careful and has never, in his career, been tested by anything more serious than moderate turbulence and a delayed instrument approach in fog. He looks over at Captain Harris. He says his name once, clearly, the way you say a name when you are not yet alarmed but you are paying attention. No response. Harris's right hand has moved to his chest. His face has changed color, a grayish quality coming into the skin, a loosening around the eyes. Danny reaches for the intercom. His training begins to activate, checklists, procedures, radio calls, the bright clean language of emergency protocol. He is doing the right things. He will keep doing the right things. But the radio is where he breaks. Not completely. Not dramatically. He does not scream. He does not fall apart in any visible, obvious way. But in the cabin, when the seatbelt sign chimes on and Danny's voice comes over the intercom, steady on the surface, correct in its information, there is something in it that is wrong. An elevation in pitch that is almost nothing. A breath taken in the middle of a sentence where there should not be a breath. A specific half-second of silence before the word situation that lasts exactly 1 beat too long. Most of the 168 passengers on that aircraft hear a voice telling them to remain seated and prepare for a precautionary landing at the nearest suitable airport. Dorothy Calloway hears a 31-year-old man who is holding the line with both hands and just barely managing. She puts her book down. She is already moving through the math. Altitude. Heading. The subtle change in the aircraft's behavior she felt 3 minutes ago, a slight softening of the particular steadiness that an experienced hand maintains without thinking. She looked up from her novel when she felt it. She noted it. She went back to reading because it could be nothing. It is not nothing. She unbuckles her seatbelt. Gerald looks at her. Ma'am, the sign. She is already standing. She moves up the aisle toward the front of the aircraft. 20 steps, maybe. A short walk. But write it the way it is, not a walk toward danger, but a walk back toward something she has been walking away from for 19 years. Her back is straight. Her chin is level. Her hands are at her sides. The farm-roughened, age-spotted, quiet hands of a 71-year-old woman from Pratt, Kansas. She passes row 4. She passes row 3. A man in 3A looks up from his laptop and sees her moving forward and opens his mouth to say something and then looks at her face and closes it again. There is something in her face that stops the sentence before it starts. Not anger. Not urgency. Certainty. The specific certainty of a person who knows exactly where they are going and why, who has known this walk without knowing they knew it, who has been preparing for it for 19 years of standing on a porch before sunrise and looking at a sky they thought they had finished with. She has not finished with it. The sky has not finished with her. A flight attendant moves to intercept her, professional, firm, already forming the words about FAA regulations and remaining seated during the sign. Dot says 4 words in a voice the flight attendant has never heard from a passenger in 11 years of service. Not loud. Not aggressive. Simply certain, in the way that a load-bearing wall is certain. Get me the cockpit. The flight attendant gets her the cockpit. The cockpit door opens. Danny Cho spins in his seat, one hand still on the controls, the other going instinctively toward the door, already defensive, already composing the words, "You cannot be in here, this is a restricted area, please return to your seat immediately." And then Dot steps through the door. She takes in the cockpit in one long look. The way she has always taken in an instrument panel, not piece by piece, but whole, the way you read a face. The altitude indicator. The heading. The airspeed. The engine parameters. The radio stack. Captain Harris on the floor in the space between the seats, one hand on his chest, eyes open and moving but unable to speak. The whole picture. In about 3 seconds. Nothing has changed. The aircraft is different, more modern avionics, a glass cockpit instead of the steam gauges she flew with for 30 years, but the language is identical. The language of what an aircraft is telling you through its instruments, through its behavior, through the numbers and the feel and the sound. That language has not changed. It is still the only language she has ever spoken without an accent. She looks at Danny Cho. He is sweating slightly. His jaw is tight. He is doing everything right by procedure and everything wrong by presence. He is radiating the thing that pilots must never radiate, which is the specific frequency of a man who is not sure he can do this. Dot steps fully into the cockpit and closes the door behind her and says, "I'm Dot. I have 14,000 hours and I used to land aircraft in weather you haven't seen in a simulator. Tell me what you have and I'll tell you what we do." Danny stares at her. At her faded floral blouse. At her age-spotted hands. At this 71-year-old woman standing in his cockpit like she has every right to be there, which, it is beginning to occur to him, she might. He says, "Ma'am, I can't." "You can," Dot says. "And you will. Because Ray needs you to." She nods at Harris on the floor. His eyes find her face when she says his name. And so do the 168 people behind that door. "Now. What do you have?" It is not a question. It has the shape of a question but it is not one. It is a command given by someone who has given commands in conditions where the next word might be the last, and Danny Cho hears the difference, and something in him, something that was very close to the edge, steps back from it. He tells her. He tells her everything, Harris's cardiac event, the diversion request to St. Louis Lambert, the crosswind component on the active runway, the fuel state, the weather, the approach procedure they have been cleared for. He talks. She listens. She does not interrupt. She is already reading the instruments as he speaks, cross-checking everything he says against what the aircraft is telling her, building the picture in that part of her mind that has been building pictures like this for 50 years and has not forgotten how. When he finishes, she says, "ILS-12L. We'll fly the full approach, glide slope all the way to minimums, you fly, I talk. Understood?" He nods. She picks up the radio handset. What happens next is this, her voice comes over the frequency at St. Louis Approach Control, and the controller on the other end, a woman named Patricia, 12 years in the job, who has heard thousands of voices on that frequency in every condition, hears something in it and straightens in her chair. The language tightens on both ends. The exchange becomes more precise, more economical, the specific grammar of two professionals who recognize each other across a wire. Patricia does not know who she is talking to. She knows she is talking to someone who has done this before. This is what command sounds like. It is recognizable even from a stranger. The approach takes 14 minutes. Dot does not touch the controls. This is important. Danny Cho is the pilot of record, the rated officer, the man responsible for this aircraft. She is not taking over. She is the voice that keeps him from becoming afraid of himself, which is the only thing threatening to take him down. She calls altitudes. She calls air speeds. She reads the glide slope. She tells him what the aircraft is doing a half second before the instruments confirm it, because she can feel it through the airframe the way she has always been able to feel it, the way Ghost could always feel it, the aircraft talking to her in a language built from physics and experience and 40 years of paying attention. 500 feet. On speed. On centerline. Looking good, Danny. You're doing it. 300 feet. Wind is steady. Don't chase it. 200 feet. Gear down, 3 green. Flaps full. You've got the runway. Danny's breathing is audible in the cockpit. Not panic, effort. The effort of a young man who is doing something he has never done and doing it anyway because the only other option is worse. Dot can hear in his breathing the same thing she has heard in her own breathing in harder moments than this, not fear exactly, but the body's honest acknowledgement that this matters. That this is real. She does not tell him to calm down. She does not tell him to breathe. She just keeps calling the numbers, clear and level, one after another, building a floor under him out of information and presence and the specific weight of a voice that has done this before. 100 feet. Threshold in sight. And then, at 50 feet, on short final, with the runway numbers filling the windshield, a crosswind gust shifts the aircraft left. Not dramatically. Maybe 8 feet of lateral movement. But on short final, 8 feet is a problem, and Danny corrects. He corrects hard. Too hard. The aircraft rocks right and the nose swings and the centerline begins to drift beneath them. Dot says one word. Easy. Just that. One word. Spoken the way you speak to someone who knows what to do and simply needs to remember that they know. Danny's hands ease. The correction reduces. The aircraft settles, not perfectly, not beautifully, but solidly, with purpose, the way aircraft land when the person flying them is scared but not defeated. The main gear touches the runway at St. Louis Lambert at 11:23 in the morning on a Tuesday. The cabin erupts. The sound comes through the cockpit door like weather, not like applause exactly, more like pressure releasing, like 168 people collectively breathing out after holding it in. Dot sits back in the observer's jump seat behind Danny's position. She looks at the instrument panel for a long moment. The altimeter reading 0. The airspeed bleeding down. The nose wheel touching. She looks at her hands. The farm-roughened, age-spotted, quiet hands that just talked a 31-year-old pilot through the hardest landing of his life. She looks at them the way she has not looked at them in 19 years. Not as the hands of a woman who fell short. As the hands of a woman who was exactly where she was supposed to be. Then she looks at Ray Harris on the floor. His eyes are open. He heard everything. All of it, her voice on the radio, her altitude calls, the one word on short final. He cannot speak. But his right arm moves. Slowly, with effort, his hand lifts from his chest and reaches toward her, toward the armrest of the observer seat where her hand is resting. He places his hand over hers. No words. Just that. She covers his hand with her other hand. Just for a moment. Just long enough. The paramedics board within 4 minutes of the aircraft stopping. Ray Harris is taken off on a stretcher, conscious, stable, squeezing the paramedic's hand when asked, which is a good sign, which turns out to be exactly the sign it looks like because he will be discharged from Barnes Jewish Hospital 3 days later and will send a letter to Pratt, Kansas that will read on her porch before sunrise and then fold carefully and put in the drawer with her commendations. Danny Cho stands at the open cockpit door and watches Dot walk back down the aisle toward seat 5C. She does not look left or right. She does not accept the touch on the arm from the woman in 7A or the words from the man in 12C who is already on his phone probably telling someone what just happened. She sits down. She finds her paperback novel. She opens it to the page she was on. The mystery set in coastal Maine. She picks up exactly where she left off. Gerald stares at her. She does not explain herself. Danny stands in the doorway for a long moment. He is looking at her the way you look at something you will spend the rest of your life trying to understand. He is 31 years old. He has just landed an aircraft with a collapsed captain and 168 passengers and a crosswind gust at 50 feet and a voice in his ear that never once wavered. He will fly for another 30 years if everything goes right. He will accumulate thousands more hours. He will face other difficult moments, weather, equipment, the ordinary emergencies that aviation produces in small doses over a long career. And in every one of those moments, somewhere in the part of him that keeps the things that matter, he will hear one word. Easy. Just that. Danny makes the announcement. He takes a breath first, a real breath, the kind you take when you have been somewhere very difficult and have come back from it. His voice is steady now. Not because the emergency is over. Because he has learned, in the last 14 minutes, what his voice can sound like when it steadies. He says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to take a moment before we deplane. The woman in seat 5C assisted with our approach today. I want you to know who she is. Her name is Captain Dorothy Calloway, retired United States Air Force. She has 14,000 flight hours. She came to the front of this aircraft and talked me through that landing, and she did it like she had never stopped flying." A pause. Brief. Specific. She probably never did. The cabin is quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then it is not quiet. It is not thunderous applause. It is not spectacle. It is quieter than that and more real, people turning in their seats, a few hands reaching across aisles to touch other hands, the sound of people who have just been reminded of something they forgot they knew. The child 2 rows back, the one who was crying over Missouri, is now watching that with enormous, solemn eyes, the way small children watch things they do not have words for yet but will remember always. Gerald looks at the wheat sticker on Dot's carry-on bag in the overhead bin. He sat next to her for 40 minutes. He thought she was somebody's grandmother. He does not say anything else. He does not need to. Dot is the last to deplane. She has always been the last to deplane. Old habit, let the crowding clear, move when there is room to move. She stands at the jet bridge door and the world is doing what the world does, rushing, maneuvering, pulling rolling bags, looking at phones. A young woman, a gate agent, maybe 24 years old, still in the early chapters of whatever her life is going to be, sees Dot at the door and stops. She has heard. You could see it in her face that she has heard. She says, simply, "Were you scared?" Dot considers the question. She always considers honest questions, she does not believe they deserve anything less. She thinks about the cockpit door opening. She thinks about the instrument panel, the way it came back to her like a language she never stopped dreaming in. She thinks about Danny's hands finding the centerline. She thinks about 19 years of standing on a porch and wondering if Ghost was really gone or just waiting. She thinks about the answer for 3 full seconds. The gate agent waits. There was no time to be scared, she says. There was only time to fly. She walks up the jet bridge. She has a connecting flight to catch. She has wheat to check on. She has a porch to stand on tomorrow morning before sunrise, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. Narrator, this is the lesson now, earned by everything that came before it. Dorothy Calloway flew back to Kansas the next morning. She stood on her porch before sunrise the way she had every day for 19 years and she looked at the sky. But something was different. For the first time in 19 years, she did not think about the missions she was pulled from or the doors that were closed to her or the rank that went to someone else. She thought about Danny Cho's hand steadying on the yoke when her voice came through the radio. She thought about Ray Harris's hand on hers. She thought about 168 people who went home. She thought about the gate agent's face. 24 years old, still at the beginning of everything, asking were you scared with the honest wide-open curiosity of someone who has not yet learned to pretend that hard things are not hard. And Dot had answered honestly because she always answers honestly, there was no time to be scared. There was only time to fly. She had meant it as a simple statement of fact. Standing on the porch in the dark, she understood it was something more. It was the truest thing she had said about herself in 19 years. It was the thing she had forgotten. She had spent 19 years believing her career was a book with the last chapter torn out. She understood now that she had the chapter wrong. The last chapter was not in a cockpit over Vietnam. It was in seat 5C on a Tuesday morning over Illinois. It was written in a floral blouse and farm-roughened hands and a voice that still knew exactly what it was doing. You cannot see a person's past in their face. You cannot know what someone is carrying by looking at what they are wearing. The person next to you in silence, in the window seat, in the waiting room, in the queue, in the ordinary unremarkable fabric of any Tuesday, may have already lived a life that would take your breath away. Look again. Ask. The world is full of ghosts who never stopped flying. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of someone you know, or someone you almost overlooked, or something you have been carrying quietly for too long, share it. And if you have not already, subscribe. There are more stories like this one waiting.